that fantastic welcome, and thank you to all those who braved the elements to be outside and listen to an overflow rally which we've just concluded outside in Regency Square. I'm really sorry about that. The problem is the halls are just not big enough. So could we say a special, very big thank you to the Fire Brigades Union, because they not only support us in so many ways and so many occasions. The fire tender that they're using as the mobile platform was in Liverpool last night, and they drove it here today to be able to help us today. And that fire truck has been in so many places all around the country, helping good causes and obviously working for the benefit of their union. Think about this. They're an emergency service we'll rely on. They're an emergency service that's constantly being told the way forward is to cut jobs and close fire stations and we'll all be safer. I don't get that logic. I'm not sure anybody else does either. So thank you to the Fire Brigade Union for all that you do. And can I say, and I hope you'll join me in doing this, to say a huge thank you to all the volunteers that have helped to put tonight's event together and all the campaigning work that we're doing. And all the support that's been given, not just over the past few days and couple of weeks since this new leadership campaign begun, but it's been given to many of us ever since the result of the last leadership election last September. You probably don't realise how important it is that we constantly state what our political objectives, priorities, desires, wishes, hopes and determinations actually are. Don't be afraid to talk about your politics. Put it out there as the kind of society we want to live in. But I would also say, in doing that, let's use language that we all understand. Let's communicate with each other in a decent and respectful way. I probably get, if I thought about it, as much abuse as anybody. I never, ever respond to any of it because I'm not prepared to get in the gutter with that kind of abuse. And so let's keep it respectful, both in our language, our printed material, and what we say on social media. To me, it's very important because you get a hearing when you do it that way. When you get into the other system, basically, you turn a lot of people off. I want to say congratulations to the Labour Party and the Labour movement in Brighton for having the largest membership unit of the Labour Party anywhere in the country. 6,000 members. And I am concerned, very concerned, about the suspension of the party in Brighton. I've asked that that be investigated and dealt with immediately. I want the party in Brighton back and functioning and full democracy for everybody in Brighton as soon as possible. But that hasn't stopped Brighton party members doing the campaigning work. And I was out this afternoon with Lloyd trying to get the votes in, and we're getting a great response and a great reception from everybody all over East Brighton this afternoon. Outside there was a very good RMT banner there concerning the issues of Southern Rail and the railway system in this country. There's something that sort of epitomises everything that's wrong about this country when we as a community have invested in the railway system ever since public ownership in 1948. We electrified the system, yes, it was underfunded in many ways, but there were very important developments that took place. Sadly, Beeching and others closed far too many lines, and we're now on a programme of hopefully reopening more and more of those lines. The Tories privatised, privatised our rail system in the early 1990s, sold it off, diced it up, and handed over train operating companies, rolling stock, and of course the whole network itself to the private sector. Railtrack ran it so badly, it was taken back into the public sector through Network Rail. It was an enormous mistake at the same time not to take the train operating companies back into public ownership as well. And if ever there was a case for the public ownership of the rail system, it's got to be the performance of Southern and the service it operates, and the way in which the company has sought to blame the unions and the workers who run the system for their closures, their cancellations, their short staffing, and all the other issues that go with it. If one rail minister can resign over the running of Southern, I think it's time for the Secretary of State to either intervene or take the issue, take the whole company back into public ownership so it can be publicly run for the benefit of everybody along that line. That is the Labour policy. The Labour policy is agreed by all that we take the train operating companies back into public ownership. But we also have to invest in the rail system to make it better for the whole country. There are some fairly small bits of reopening that could be done that would make a massive difference, such as the Uckfield Link, such as refurbishment of the Southern route. All of those things are important. But fundamentally, it's about the importance of a rail system for the whole country. We invested in it, we should get the benefits from it, the passengers should get the benefits from it. They are not at the present time, with grotesque levels of overcrowding, inefficiency of service, which does a lot of harm to people trying to get to London to work or get to Brighton just to visit Brighton and help the economy of this city. Surely we can do things a lot better, and it requires a preparedness for the public to intervene to achieve that. That is what Labour will do. But while we're talking of public transport, we also need to look at access to transport for all. Access, yes, through a ticketing system that is fair and better in the rail system, but also access to the bus service, and in particular the restoration of rural bus services, so that rural Britain doesn't become just a preserve of those that can afford to live there. We need the revitalisation of the rural economy as well as of the urban economy. And so our whole policy, our whole ideas since the Labour leadership election last year are about challenging levels of inequality and injustice within our society. At the last election, yes, we said some good stuff about inequality and injustice. The problem was we were also offering an economic story which included a continuation of the public sector pay freeze and included a continuation of some of the cuts, and still allowed all our local authorities to be so grotesquely underfunded. Those that have to administer it are faced with an adult social care crisis. We have to be prepared to make the argument for investment in public services for the good of all, but particularly of the most vulnerable people within our society. And there's no issue where it's more obvious of the need for a proper public involvement and investment than in the housing crisis that faces so many in our society. Look at it all across the piece. We have a rise in the number of people who are desperate, who are homeless, who are sleeping on the streets or begging to receive enough money in order to get into a night shelter. We have more people than ever before using food banks within our society. We have more people living in insecure, private rented accommodation, some of it in a very bad condition. We have council housing that is denigrated by our government and denigrated by much of the media, who don't seem to realise that it was the vision of previous governments that were prepared to invest in secure lifetime tenancies in council housing that gave people the security of accommodation and gave children the security to grow up knowing they weren't about to lose their home. Think of what it must be like for a child changing school so often, moving sometimes from town to town because their parents don't quite qualify for that prize of a council tenancy with a secure lifetime attachment to it. They can't afford one private rented sector flat after another because the benefit cap is overtaken by the level of rent. The damage that does to those children and those families in their lives doesn't go away. Surely we can and must do things better and differently. Investing in good quality housing rather than telling councils to sell it off. Investing in lifetime tenancies rather than taking them away. Investing in good quality housing has an awful lot of benefits. It obviously helps those in housing need, obviously. It helps children to lead better lives, obviously. It also actually helps the economy. You've got more people working on building and maintaining those properties. You've got a whole job creation all down the supply chain. I want a Labour government that makes the housing crisis a priority to be dealt with. And to give local authorities and government the power to also help first-time buyers with mortgages so that we end up with a better housed community all across the country rather than what is happening at the moment. Brighton has now inherited the housing problems of London with the level of rent increases, with the shortage of housing. Well done the council on trying to build. Well done the council on its ideas of cooperative management of properties. I think those are all great and exciting ideas. But we need a government that doesn't take from councils in areas of the greatest need, but instead reverses the process and puts central government money into the areas of greatest need rather than taking it away from them, which is all that this Tory government has done for the past 6 years. You could overlay a map of poverty in Britain with another map of the areas of greatest cuts in local government expenditure, and it would be the same places that are affected by it. Those are their priorities, they're not our priorities. We can and must do things very, very differently. I want to see an attack also on the grotesque levels of inequality that exist in health in this country. Why is it the poorest areas have the shortest life expectancy? Why is it that the poorest areas have the greatest need of improvements in the health service? Why is it that we have a government that has allowed the health service to become so underfunded that almost every hospital has a debt or a deficit to cope with, and all those commissioning authorities are having to ration the supply of the most expensive, often new frontier medicines? The upshot and end of all this is that those that can afford it will be worried about waiting lists of waiting times and queues, and will be tempted into the private sector. Where that leads to is that our NHS, from being the place of universal port of call, first off for all of us, will become a health service of last resort for those that can't afford to go private. It's that serious, the way this government treats our National Health Service. Be inspired by the work done by an Aaron Bevan and that post-war Labour government that wanted the National Health Service as a human right tool at the point of use, and campaign for it and defend it, because it's the greatest achievement that we ever made to make healthcare a human right, not a privilege. But there are other issues issues within our society I feel, and I'm sure you all do as well, very strongly about, and that is the mental health crisis that's facing our society. During our lifetime, a quarter of us in this huge hall tonight will face some kind of deep depression, some kind of crisis that we may or may not want to talk about, may or may not want to share with others. Some of us will have loving partners, loving family, loving community, who would recognise we're going through a difficult time and we're in a difficult place and reach out for us and help us. Others will not. Too many young people in school, in college, in university are often afraid of the stigma of talking about any crisis that they're going through. Sadly, some of those end up taking their own lives because a combination of lack of services, lack of resources, lack of respect, and a deep stigma within our society. We can do two things. One we can do ourselves, the other we can demand of public services. The first one is that we don't use language of abuse of those people that are going through a mental health crisis. We recognise we have to reach out to everybody to help them get through it. And that we insist our mental health services are properly funded. Talking therapy is properly funded. Long stay places where they're necessary are properly funded, and the very important role played by much of the very good elements of the voluntary sector in trying to support people going through this crisis are properly supported and funded. A society that reaches out for all is a more content society, is a better society, and recognises all of us can have problems, but all of us can also get through those problems and continue making the contribution we want to make to our world and our society. It is about how we do things as a society and how we do things as a community. But inequality is so much at the core of what is wrong with modern Britain. Wrong with Britain in the sense, I've said, of housing and of health and of education. Our schools are wonderful. Our teachers are wonderful. Work incredibly hard. I was at the NUT conference in this very town, talking to them at Easter, working with them. That was when we mounted the campaign and we defeated the government on forced academisation of every school. They were forced to backtrack on it. Because I want to see an education system that is a community of education, that has local education authorities that bring schools together, rather than the government intervening to set up every school as a competitor to the school down the road. Surely schools working together to provide the add-ons that all of our children need are far better than bringing up our children with the idea that somehow or other every other school is a competitor to their school. How about a cooperator for every school, so you do things together rather than attack each other? And so it's re-establishing that that's so important, and not insisting that every new school has to be a free school or academy. Give local authorities the opportunity and the chance to improve and develop our education and make it democratically accountable to the entire community through the ballot box of local government. But education has to be treated not as the commodity that the Conservatives seem to think it is, but as a right and an opportunity for all of us. Yesterday was a very sad day. It was the end of all maintenance grants for anyone wanting to go and study in our universities. My generation had the opportunity of, yes, of course, free school education, free college education, and essentially free university education. What is it about a generation that felt they could pull up the ladder on the next generation and introduce fees, charges, costs, and between massive debts to that generation of those that have gone to university. Now, if somebody gets to university to study, they become a doctor, engineer, lawyer, architect, philosopher, teacher, nurse, lots of things. Yes, the individual of course benefits, and well done them. And it was a pleasure outside just to meet some new graduates and congratulate them on getting their degrees. They've done well. Well done to them. Well done the contribution they're going to make. But also, well done all of us. We've got better doctors, better engineers, better scientists. We've got all of those things. Education is a plus and an add-on for all. So, treating our services as a good for all of us surely has to be the right way forward. But it's also about how we approach ideas and learning. I so often meet charities that are doing therapy work, that are helping rehabilitation through drama, through art, through poetry, through song, through music, through dance, all grossly underfunded, grotesquely under pressure because they can't cope with the demands put upon them. And so many of our opportunities for young people to undertake music and all the other creative arts that they want to do being closed or underfunded or restricted to those that can afford to go privately to get it. It was a Labour government in the 1960s that established the Arts Council. It was a Labour minister, Jenny Lee, who set it up, the daughter of a miner who wanted to see that all communities and all children had the opportunity for artistic endeavour. Let's not be frightened of artistic endeavour, of poetry, of ideas and all that. Promote the creativity that art brings and the way it brings our communities together. Investment in the creative arts is surely something we can all be very, very proud of. But surely that is the kind of society that we all want to live in. And then the issue is, people say, well, all this is fine, of course, but it's going to cost a great deal of money. Well, there's a number of issues here. What is it wrong? What is it that's so wrong in modern Britain about the way we run our industries? BHS, household name, high street store. Philip Green, wonderful man, wonderful man. He's been made a government minister, he's been given awards and gongs and all kinds of things. He must be a wonderful man. He's so busy he can't afford to live in this country. He's forced to live in Monaco because he can't afford to pay his taxes here. And unfortunately, BHS has suffered as a result of his endeavours. And so, BHS closes. Hundreds of people lose their jobs. Others lose their jobs down the supply chain. All this at the same time when its chief executive is living in tax exile, while its pension fund is being damaged, while the jobs are being lost, while the hopes of those people working in that enterprise are also destroyed. Why couldn't the government intervene when they knew what was happening, and do something about it? And then you look at the quality of employment offered in other places. My great friend Dennis Skinner explained to me what Shirebrook is about. And I have to say thank you to Dennis for the incredible support that he's given to this campaign and all the other progressive causes over many years. And it was a pleasure to speak alongside Dennis at the Durham Miners' Gala a few weeks ago. He worked at Shirebrook. He worked in Shirebrook as a miner. He dug coal along with everybody else. They were a multi-ethnic, multinational workforce. They didn't blame each other, they worked together. They worked together in the same place, they were paid the same wages, they were in the same union, they were part of the same very strong and very proud community. Thatcher came along The Tories came along with their neoliberal economics, and we're still suffering from Thatcher's neoliberal economic ideas, and attacked the miners' union, attacked the other unions, destroyed the manufacturing base in this country by attacking the steel industry and many others, but also particularly the mining industry. And so those mining communities then, from being proud communities that brought people together and supported each other, became places of desperation, of high unemployment, of a kind of social dislocation. And Shirebrook, once a mine, is now a factory run by Sport Direct, a factory that employs people on 0 hours contracts, that even an all-party select committee has utterly condemned for its lack of concern for the safety and welfare of its employees, for the number of times ambulances and fire tenders are called to that place, and the insecurity of the work. Would you add up the aggregation, the average of the hours actually worked, doesn't even add up to a minimum wage on a weekly basis. Workers there, insecure, and also sometimes being blamed for their own insecurity because they are of a different nationality. We need to bring people together to demand an end to 0 hours contracts, an end to that level of exploitation, and to repeal the Trade Union Act and also grant real job security to people within our society. So you achieve that not by letting the market rip, which is essentially what this government does, what Thatcher did to excess, and instead look at a different way of dealing with economic issues. Our Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, John McDonnell, I think he's done a fantastic job as Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer. John understands these issues and campaigns very hard on these issues. And so when he stood up here in Brighton last September and said austerity was a political choice, not an economic necessity, they all said, whoa, 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 you can't possibly say that. There's got to be austerity. John said, why? 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 Because you can't cut your way to prosperity, you invest your way to prosperity. And you know what? A year later, everybody agrees with it. And so, as we develop our economic strategy, we develop an economic strategy which is about investment, which is about the establishment of a national investment bank, which is about saying to those banks that we bailed out so generously, all of us, we're very generous people, bailed them out 8 years ago, that, hang on, you've got a responsibility as well. So when Lloyds Bank celebrate a profit of 2.5 billion by sacking hundreds of workers and closing dozens and dozens of branches, I say to them, think again. It was us who bailed you out. You owe a responsibility to your workforce and to the wider community. And so we developed a national investment bank with a regional arm to that national investment bank to ensure there is fairness in the distribution of government investment across the whole country, to generate areas, to regenerate areas, to promote better quality employment, high quality manufacturing industry. But we measure our success or otherwise not just in the conventional finance figures, important as they are. You also measure it in the reduction of inequality within our society. The number of people no longer living in poverty, the number of children no longer living in poverty. And you measure on how you reduce the gender pay gap and opportunities for women as well as men in the workplace, and what your impact is on the environment and the sustainability of what you're doing. It's a different way of looking at things and a different way of thinking about things. An economy that works for all and for all regions, but one whose objectives are, of course, full employment, are, of course, a growing economy, but also about making sure the benefits are properly shared to those who need them the most. Over the past 50 years, inequality has risen across the Western world. Inequality has risen worse in Britain more than most other countries. The proportion of income that goes on wages has fallen. The proportion of income that goes on high executive pay and on dividends has risen. We have the lowest level of investment of most countries in the OECD. We have a big task ahead of us. So it's putting forward the economic alternatives about the kind of society that we want to live in that is so important and so central. I was very proud when we had the Labour leadership election a year ago. It's not about an individual, it's about what we collectively as a society want to do and want to achieve. It is about hopes and aspirations for everybody, but it's also about dealing with injustice and inequality, unleashing and unlocking that potential that's there in all. Poverty is so wasteful. A child growing up in poverty underachieves. A child growing up in poverty is unlikely to get the educational benefits that others will get. How many brilliant scientists, poets, engineers, doctors, philosophers and everybody else have we lost because of poverty in the past and will lose in the future? It's unlocking the potential in all. And so it's building that different society, but it's also how we approach other issues, how we approach dealing with issues of injustice. That's why I was so pleased that we managed to fight hard when the government tried to take away personal independence payments for those with disabilities. I want to go further and get rid of the appalling way in which the availability for work tests are operated and the impact that has on people with disabilities. It's about creating that kind of society. And it's also about how we view our place in the rest of the world. An international strategy and a foreign policy that's based on human rights and justice, not necessarily the ease of selling arms to countries that would oppress its own citizens and invade our safety. It's about how we approach our democracy. Our party has grown enormously, and we have received more media attacks than at any time in our history. I wonder why. There may be a connection. There's one newspaper, I won't give you the name, but I'll leave it to you to guess, answers on a postcard please, that over the past year, of all the hundreds of stories they've printed about the Labour Party in all its forms, 84% of them have been downright hostile. 16% have been judged more or less neutral. It's not me, this is academics that have done this. And 0% were deemed to be positive about the party in any way. Other papers, not quite as bad, but getting that way. What is it about a large party membership, a large and very active party membership, that is challenging on injustice, on poverty, on inequality, on environment, and so many other issues? What is it about that that many of these people find so frightening? I simply say to them this. Our movement grew out of very brave people, meeting in very difficult circumstances, taking enormous risks in order to form community groups, in order to form trade unions, in order to form socialist societies and unions that came together eventually to found our party. They came together around a set of principles about how society should be and how we should treat each other. The respect we should have for each other, the human endeavour we should recognise in each other. And at the end of all that, we created a party that, sure, it's had its ups and downs, but we have the National Health Service to be proud of. We have the principles of the welfare state to be proud of. We have the Human Rights Act. We have the Equalities Act. We have an awful lot of things that we've achieved. If we work together on a determination of the kind of country we can create and the kind of contribution we can make to the rest of the world, we're all together, we're all stronger, we're all achieving things. We don't have to live in a divided country. We don't have to live in fear of racism and division. We don't have to live in a society where so many children are left behind, where we walk by on the other side to those that have been dropped out of society altogether. We're stronger, we're better when we do things together. I'm very proud of the size of the Labour Party membership. I'm very proud of the work that's done by so many people within the Labour Party. And in this election, we're campaigning on all these principles and on all these issues. But we're also campaigning as how we're going to fight election campaigns in the future to raise the hopes and sights of everyone in our society of how different and how much better it can be, so we don't have the arid nastiness of a market-run economy by a Tory party that only knows division and misery. Unite people together. United we're very